And Marty, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Marty Mead. I'm a program manager and I work with Karen with the ADTBI waivers.
Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to our partners at Medicaid and Long-Term Care. Jeremy?
Thank you, Karen. Jeremy Brunson, I'm one of our deputy directors here in Medicaid, specifically responsible for the finance area as well as our provider screening enrollment and program integrity teams. And I know we have a couple people on here from the Medicaid team. I'll pass it first to you, Danny, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hi, this is Danny Van Orney. I'm the Rates and Reimbursement Administrator with Medicaid. Good afternoon.
And then I also believe we might have Melinda on from our team as well. Melinda Abbott, do you want to introduce yourself? Oop, looks like you're on mute, Melinda.
Sorry about that. I just got done with one meeting and finishing up. Melinda Abbott with Resource Development, Medicaid Long-Term Care, Resource Development Supervisor.
Great. Thank you. And I think that's all we have on from the Medicaid team, so I can pass it back to you, Karen.
Thank you. So in doing our rate study for the aged and disabled waiver, traumatic brain injury waiver, and personal assistance services, we have contracted with CBIZ Optimus and their subcontractor Myers and Stoffers, to complete a rate study for these programs. The goal of this study is to establish a rate model for services provided to the aged and individuals with disabilities. There's a variety of services being looked at for this rate study, and that if you need more information on those specific services, it is outlined on our public website in more detail. I'm going to hand it over to Martin to introduce Optimus and Myers and Stoffers.
Thanks, Karen. I am Martin McNamara with Optimus. I'm a senior consultant, and we've been contracted to perform this rate study. We here at Optimus will be doing more so the calculation side of the rate study and making the final rate recommendation. And the folks at Myers and Stoffer will be collecting the cost surveys. They also develop the cost surveys and working more on that end. Ainsley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Hi, my name's Ainsley Ramsey. I'm a senior consultant at Optimus. I've been working with the state of Nebraska for just under 3 years. I'll be providing analytical support to both Martin and then also Tomas Abrate, who will be joining us in just a few minutes. He's been working with the state for just under 5 years, and he's working with another client commitment at the moment, so he will be on in just a few short minutes.
Krista, would you like to introduce the Myers and Stoffer team?
Sure. Thank you, Martin. I'm Krista Stefani, and I'm a member with Myers and Stoffer. And as Martin mentioned earlier, we are responsible for developing the cost survey, distributing and collecting the cost information that will assist the Optimus team with the rate study. I'll be back visiting you here shortly.
So we just have a couple slides to go over before Krista goes into more detail about what the tool for the cost survey looks like. I did want to share that the team working on the rate study met this morning and we've decided to allow an extension. So the cost survey is now due on June 24th to allow some additional weeks for you to gather the information needed. We will be updating the website and the materials on the website by the end of the week to reflect that. So on our agenda today, we were doing the introductions. Krista's going to do a high-level overview of the cost survey. And this meeting is geared more towards agency providers. So if you are in assisted living and you have some additional questions about that, we went over that in a little bit more detail this morning. And the independent providers have more of a survey to complete instead of this full cost survey tool. So please look at the website in more detail. If you're an independent provider, there's a separate link for you, as some of this larger stuff for the cost survey may not apply. In regards to what to expect from DHHS and next steps, we do have our timeline outlined here. And of course, we are going to update item number 2 and 3 to kind of reflect the extension we're giving to June 24th for providers to complete the cost survey. But as on this outline, you can see that in the months of July and August, we are going to be having some additional meetings to talk about what was discovered through this cost survey process and the review of looking at other states and the draft information. So that will be the next steps from DHHS, is to have some additional meetings. So Krista, I think I'm going to hand it over to you to go over your portion.
All right, thank you, Karen. I'm going to pull up a copy of the cost survey. And just a couple items to note. When you download the cost survey from the department's website, please save the document to your personal computer or to another drive, as this is not an internet fillable form. I would hate for you to go through and take the time to complete the cost survey, just open it up and then close and realize that all of the information is lost. So please make sure that you download it to your computer or other network drive. Also, as Karen stated, this cost survey is meant to be completed by agencies, not the individual providers, as this is a more comprehensive look into the costs related to operating an agency and some of that information the independent providers may not have. When you first open up the cost survey, you may receive this warning saying it's in protected view. As far as I know, there aren't any viruses attached to this document. So if you select Enable Editing, it will allow you to save the document and also complete the information being requested. Once you enable that editing, you may get another security warning. That is because there are macros built into this cost survey that allow for functionality throughout the workbook. In order to see all the content that would be applicable to your agency, you will need to select Enable Content. If for some reason you do not have a macro-enabled version of Excel or an Excel version that will allow you to use these macros, please reach out to necostsurvey@mslc.com, and we can provide you with a cost survey that will reflect the services that your agency provides. So once you select Enable Content, that will let the macros work throughout the workbook. Some of those macros are attached to the Services tab. And as Karen stated earlier, there are numerous services that are included within the Aged and Disabled Waiver and the Personal Assistance Services, or PASS. These are the services that we are looking to collect information for related to this rate study. And so being an agency provider, you'll want to select an X for each of the services that you provide. So for our example today, I'm going to select chore, non-medical transportation, and companion. Now, if I understand correctly, during 2021, which is the year that we are asking you to complete this cost survey for, I believe in August, the waiver was amended to separate out the chore, companion, and personal care from what was historically called chore services. If you have information that you are able to separate out the differences in cost in the services provided prior to August, you would select chore historical, and then after August, you would select chore, companion, and personal care. Once you select the services on this tab, if you select on any other tab, you will notice that there will be some specific service-specific tabs that will populate within the cost survey. These are some additional schedules that we are asking you to prepare related to your service delivery for these services. The other tabs within the workbook are required by all agencies. So the provider data through the expenses tab, those are required to be completed no matter what services you provide. I'd like to just take a minute to talk a little bit about the units and revenues tab, as we had some questions come through earlier today in the assisted living question and answer session, as well as I've had questions through email related to what do we report on this schedule. So as you can see on the top part of this section, it's asking you to report billed units and billed revenues related to the waiver services, the aged and disabled waiver services, and pass revenues. So these are the services that are provided to your Medicaid participants. Also down below, there is a section for the non-waiver service and non-pass revenues. This is where you'll report information related to, for example, a cash paying participant, or maybe they have some other form of insurance. You'll report that information there. Chris, I see that you have a question. Are the units by hour or 15-minute units? The unit of, that's a good question. In the unit of service, I've pre-populated based on my understanding of the fee schedule. So if it's an hourly bill service, then you would report hourly, the total hours that you billed for that service. If it's a daily, you would report the total daily units that are provided. If there are 15 minutes, then I would convert it to an hourly to match this fee schedule. Also earlier today, we had a question about how do we account for the Medicaid participants' share of cost. You have two options. You can either combine the total revenues that you received from Medicaid and that share of cost to report the total here, or if you would like to show that separate funding source, you may use an other revenue and just define it as a Medicaid share of cost portion and note those total revenues received down here. Also in the other revenue section, if you received any other COVID add-on payments, grants, you'll report those revenues down here at the bottom section, not up with your normal waiver service revenues, because that's not something that occurs in the normal course of business for the services provided. It was more of an exception than the rule. And also when you report the other revenue, you have the option to either combine all of your miscellaneous revenues into one line and just provide us with an explanation of what's included there, or you could use report the revenues on individual lines, whatever easiest for you to complete this survey. I'm going to move to the direct support employee tab. And as you can see, what we are asking for here is information related to your direct support professionals. So these are the individuals which you employ that go out and they are actually providing the services and working with the participants. What we are asking for you to do is to identify the employee position. We do have a pre-populated list. And if you scroll down further on this page, we provided some guidance as to what we feel the functions of that position are. But if you feel that you have a position that is not covered within these pre-populated titles, you may type your own description. As for the education and experience columns, we're asking you to populate what is required of that position, not necessarily what is happening. So if it's required for that caregiver to only have a high school diploma and have 0 to 2 years of work experience to provide service, then we're asking you to provide that information here. We're also asking you to add in the total number of salaries paid and the total hours, regular hours worked. So these are non-overtime hours that were worked or paid. I'm just making up numbers for our example here. And then if you have any overtime, then you would enter that information here. And you can see that a weighted average pay rate will calculate. From there, based on the services that you indicated on the services tab, you will see that there are columns that are populated on this tab, as well as on the direct support contracted, if that's applicable to your agency, program staff tab, productivity and transportation tab, and the expenses tab will all modify to only show columns that relate to your services. What we are asking for you to do for the employees in that position is to take of the total salaries and wages paid, is to dedicate and figure out a percent of time related to the services. So for example, say 50% of your services are chore, 20% are companion, 30% are non-medical transportation, and your agency does not provide any other non-waiver services. This total should equal 100%. You may have noticed that before I entered the 30% in non-medical transportation, there was a warning out to the side. If the totals across the row do not equal 100, you will see this message to indicate to you that something isn't right and we still need to account for 100% of that direct support professional's wage. You do not need to complete one line per employee. You can sum and total all wages paid for that position onto one line. And if you have various positions, you could use one line per position. As far as trying to determine what percent of time the direct support professionals provided related to each service, you could either survey your direct support professionals and say, hey, on average, how many days or hours per week do you provide chore services versus companion, etc. Or you may be able to use your billing records to help you discern the split. If everything is on an equivalent unit, such as an hour, and 50% of your billed hours are related to chore, then you would enter the 50% here. Now remember, again, this is to select or to report information related to your direct support professionals. Again, those are your employees who are working individually with the participants in a one-to-one manner or in a group setting. They are actually providing the service. As for your program-related staff, there is a similar schedule that is set up in the same manner with the employee position, or you can modify your own. But these program staff, they're more of your support staff. They are not necessarily working directly with your participants. Rather, they are there to supervise the provision of service, and they may be positions that are required for your agency to provide the service, that are required through licensing and certification to show that you do have that position, such as a supervisor, in order to provide the service. These are not your general and administrative staff, such as a business office manager or payroll staff. Those employees are not included on this schedule. One difference in indicating what services utilize that support or that supervisor position is you do not need to break down the percent of time. All you'll need to do on this schedule is indicate with an X that yes, this position, such as an assistant director, does provide services and oversees the chore program. Once you place an X, what will happen is the wages and hours that are reported here will be allocated to that service on the expense tab based on the hours and wages paid to your direct support employees. Chris asked, would this include things like schedulers? Is that for your program related staff, Chris? I'm sorry, I didn't see your question until just now.
Maybe you could just
Yeah.
quickly pop over and show her the administrative versus program.
Yeah, so for the administrative wages, they will be reported separately on the expenses tab underneath administrative salaries. But going back for the program staff, to get all shifts, if you're coordinating services to provide to the participants, and it's required that you need that scheduling, I would generally say that scheduler would be included in the program-related staff. One of the items I'd like to point out on the productivity and transportation tab is if your agency does provide non-medical transportation, if we go down to the bottom, it does look like we're asking some questions twice, but I promise we're not. Under non-medical transportation, we're asking you to populate on this page the percent of total expense related to transportation that you've reported on the expenses tab within the company vehicle, public transportation, and mileage lines. Also, we're asking you to indicate the total number of trips provided and what percent of those trips were provided using company vehicles versus vehicles owned by employees. You'll see once I populate some numbers in here that if you go over to your non-medical transportation service specific tab, that information will automatically calculate on this tab. And we're just trying to get some additional information related to non-medical transportation here. As far as expenses go, whatever you report for direct support professionals on the direct support employee tab and the direct support contracted tab, that will automatically populate here, so you do not need to re-enter that information. And the same with your program related employee salaries, and it will show the allocation based on the percentages or the X's you entered. The other information on this tab that's in the light blue or gray colored cells, you'll need to enter. And there are also spaces within each section for you to add a specific title if you feel that the expenses do not fall underneath one of these pre-populated categories. Also, you are not expected to enter a dollar amount on every line. These are just set, these pre-populated lines are set as a guidance, not a requirement. And if you click on this little information button, then it should provide you with a little bit more information of what type of expenses we're expecting to see on that line. So I'd like to pause there and open this up for questions. We do have various training modules for each tab that are located out on the department's website as well. So if you want a little bit more in-depth training related to each individual tab, please refer to those training modules. Other than that, I'd like to open it up for you to ask questions that we can address here live.
If we have financials that are merged with other, we don't have a separation between each, how do you want us to indicate that?
That's a great question. So if all of your services and expenses, your financial statements include expenses for all operations, this cost survey is built to allocate those expenses based on information on each of these tabs. So let's say, I'm just making up an example, you operate a laundry service as well as these waiver services. Within the direct support employee tab, you would report those laundry specific wages here and just add a percentage. And also if any of your program staff provide services for that laundry business. You would indicate that with an X here. What will happen then is information will populate in this non-waiver services tab, or excuse me, column on this tab, and it will allocate program costs will allocate based on the program rate wages, and then your administrative and general costs. Once you enter that information, they will allocate based on each operation's percentage of the total. What we're calling this line is accumulated costs. That's the sum of your direct costs for your direct support professionals plus your program related. And that statistics will be used to allocate the costs throughout. So you don't need to do the manual calculation. You can enter totals.
So we can't, okay.
Yeah. And hopefully that will help you out a little bit so you don't have to do those manual side calculations. All right, so it looks like a few more questions have come through. Sorry if I cut you off.
No, you're good.
So yes, this darker gray area on the expenses tab is protected. That's because it will be formula driven on this darker blue. All you'll need to enter is information in these light blue, or maybe it shows a different gray. I know each monitor shows slightly different color. So the cell that I'm selected now, that's where you enter information. Everything else will either be blocked or it will have a formula if it's this darker shade of blue. So Debbie, based on the other information on the other included on the other tabs, amounts will automatically calculate in these other gray cells out to the right. Stephanie has a question of what if the HHAs make different wages? Some have been here longer than others. Do we just average out the pay rate? Stephanie, you have the option. If you would like to report all of the wages on one line, you can. If you want to break it out because of the amount of time that your workers have been employed with your agency, you can, to show what will end up happening. It will be a weighted average pay rate that will end up calculating on your direct support employee tab for those positions. So that will automatically calculate based on the salaries and wages and hours reported. Jackie's asking if our agency has more than just aged and disabled. You have multiple waivers. How would you like to differentiate between A and D versus DD or Title 20? That's a great question, Jackie. We are looking specifically again towards the aged and disabled services. So any of those services covered underneath the DD waiver or the Title 20, you'll report the percentages for your direct support employees and program staff. You'll note an X in this other non-waiver services column. This non-waiver services column is basically a catch-all for any services that your agency operates that are not included on the services tab. And Chris asks, sometimes we have to pay a bonus to get a shift covered for a client. Where do we allocate those dollars? That's a great question. On the direct support employee tab, we're asking you not to include any bonus pay, and that will pop up if you select the salaries and wages informational button. But you'll see on the expenses tab, you scroll all the way to the top, we do have a spot for bonus pay for you to report that. And although it may not be a perfect methodology, it will allocate as an employee benefit to the wages based on that service's wages as a percent of the total wages and salaries. Melissa has a question on the productivity and transportation tab. Are we supposed to include the time of both the direct employee and direct contracted pay? That's a great question, Melissa. For the productivity, I would go ahead and provide this information for both. So if you have contracted employees, or I guess they wouldn't be employees, contractors that are providing direct support, and they are performing services and have travel time, record keeping, other employer time. So they're meeting with your employee staff to provide updates on services or have supervision or other sort of staff meetings, then I would include that information here. What this tab is trying to collect is information related to your direct support staff that may not necessarily be billable or considered directly working with the participant or individual, but it's required for that service to be completed. And if it's not considered in billable time, we want to be able to account for that, such as training, training hours that are required for them to, in their first year of employment, like time spent job shadowing that you can't necessarily bill for them being there and observing, but it's required for them to provide that service, or any other hours they spent training. That's what we are trying to capture here. These are great questions. If we have any more, I'm happy to answer.
Question for you. If we don't bill like 4 hours, 8-hour days, how do you want us to differentiate? I know you said something about 24 hours versus the different divisions of hours. If we do like 1 day versus, because we don't separate them all out, I don't believe. I will let you know, this is my 3rd day at work, so.
Oh, okay.
A lot of strange questions at this point.
So would that be, I guess, let me go back. Would that be related to this units and revenues tab, are you thinking? Or just to make sure I get my...
I think it's the number of hours.
Oh, on the productivity and transportation
I think so.
tab. So really what we're looking for up here in this first section of productivity is just on average, what does your normal direct support employee, how many hours per week do they work? We realize that there is a variety of part-time, full-time services, or that there might be services that are limited to number of days, hours per week. So if they normally, let's just for this example, your direct support staff work 40 hours per week, then what will happen is you'll ask them, like, when you travel in a week, you know, how many hours do you think you're traveling between individuals servicing or providing services for each participant? Then you'll enter like 2 hours there, and it will calculate the total, what we'd say non-productive or not actually working one-on-one with that participant time there. Does that answer your question, Laura?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Chris is asking is there someone for us to contact if we have issues with the survey, any specific email or phone? That's a great question, Chris. And yes, please reach out to, on the instructions tab, you'll see underneath step 5 or on step 6, there's this NE cost survey at mslc.com. You could reach out to that email address and we will be in contact with you. I would ask that you give us at least 1 business day to get back to you, and it's all dependent on the number of questions that we receive, but we will get back with you. Melissa has a question for the administrative employees. Do we report those wages on the expense tab only? Yes, Melissa, that is correct. There's no need for you to go through and identify the % of time per service. You'll report your administrative salaries and wages on this line. If you have a significant marketing and fundraising department, then you will want to report those expenses down in this non-reimbursable section. And that is because per the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, fundraising and marketing wages are not deemed to be allowable as part of a reimbursement for agencies, or if because they deem it not related to participant care. But otherwise, yes, you'll just report the total wages here, and then the survey will allocate those expenses to each service. Josh has a question for the fiscal year. Do you want us to use our contract dates with the state, or should we use January through December? Karen, do you have a preference? I was thinking they're the normal fiscal period, but if you would rather have them report on the state contract, how would you like to?
It doesn't necessarily have to be the state contract dates. Krista, I'm not sure what you mean by normal fiscal process, or did we want to encourage the calendar year, or what did you mean by fiscal process?
So I guess I would say for each agency, if your normal accounting cycle for a year is January through December, that's what I would consider their normal fiscal period, versus trying to calculate revenues and expenses related to an alternate year, such as a July 1 through June 30th timeframe.
Yes, so I agree with Krista's answer, and it doesn't necessarily have to align with the provider agreement dates.
Thank you, Karen. Ron had a question. He was not able to join at the start of the meeting. Is there a non-disclosure agreement for the financial information that we provide? Great question, Ron. On the provider data tab, there is this small statement that you say that you are providing information. Sorry, these are my testing notes. But you all say that the information you've provided is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge. But the reason that we're providing this information is for the state of Nebraska's use for this rate study. We will not be sharing this information outside of the state of Nebraska. You are welcome.
Can you also confirm that like specific providers won't be mentioned in the report or anything like that?
Yeah, when we provide the information, so our role in this is to provide the information to Optimus for their rate calculations. And then from there, Martin, please step in, but I do not believe that any specific provider's information will be shared in any sort of report.
That's right. We will be aggregating the data for use in the rate setting. So there might be some analytics done at the provider level, but those will not be shared. That will just be for identifying things like outliers. Once we get past that point, all the data is going to be aggregated, and we will only ever share aggregated data, and that's what the rates will be based off of.
So since there's a break in questions, I'm going to take a moment to share that on the provider page for Medicaid and long-term care, and on the page that Security provided the link for, there are some videos that Krista recorded, and they're done by modules so that you don't have to watch the 3-hour video or it might be longer than 3 hours to figure out the answer to your question. And you can hone into maybe a specific area of the cost study survey instructions that you have questions on. So thank you, Krista, for putting those videos together to help explain this document in more detail. And of course, there's instructions and hints throughout the document, and the email address that's on the document and in other places to contact with questions. So thank you. There's a, go ahead.
Go ahead, Karen. Go ahead.
We were going to do the same thing, so go ahead.
I was just gonna say there was another question that came up. Will the agencies that participated have access to the aggregated data?
At some point down the road, and I apologize, we are figuring out the timeline now that we have offered an extension on the dates, but we do plan on sharing some form of aggregated data. We aren't sure exactly what level that's going to be just yet. It may be just total program dollars and that type of thing. But we're still evaluating that. But once we get to that point, we will be sharing that information.
Yeah, so Matt has a comment saying that the fiscal year 2021 data is not accurate reflection of the current caregiver costs, and how do we account for that significant increases? Thank you, Matt, for this question. Martin, do you want to address that?
Sure. So for the purposes of this survey, we do want to collect the actual 21 costs. However, we do understand that things as far as caregiver wages and ability to fill positions is changing. So we will not be simply using this cost survey data as the sole source of information. We will be applying trend or inflation factors to the data to bring it up to the point where it will be usable for the period that the rates will actually apply for, or rather what we the recommendation we make to the state on when the rates should apply. So if you want to provide more information on how costs are changing, there is a box for additional comments on the questions tab that Krista has pulled up here. So any additional information about how costs are changing, you can include here, and we'll review that as part of our trend analysis.
So we're getting close to the end of our presentation, and we're likely going to wrap up this meeting here in a few minutes if there's no additional questions. I wanted to thank all of you for your interest in participating in the rate study and for sharing information with us and our contractors on the cost of doing business, so that we can move forward and take that into consideration when establishing rates in the near future. And the information, as Martin said, they will provide recommendations to the state on how we should proceed. As stated at the beginning of the meeting, we do plan on having some additional stakeholder engagement in July and August regarding these items, regarding the draft rate methodology and items like that. So please subscribe to the websites that were announced in your email, and stay tuned for more information, of course. I'm just going to share my screen one more time here. So just a reminder, we did extend the due date of the survey to June 24th, 2022. We're in the process of updating the public website and the materials to reflect that, and it should be done by the end of the week. Remember to download and save a copy of the cost survey and enable the content. If you have questions specific to the survey, there is an email address that they will get back to as soon as they can, within one business day if possible. And Medicaid and long-term care, did you have anything you wanted to say to help close up this meeting? I did see one more question come through.
No, Karen, I'm good.
Thank you. At this time, I can't give you a concrete date on when the rates will go into effect. There's some dependencies on how the recommendations come forward. Depending on what the recommendations are, there is a chance we have to go to the legislature and ask for more money. So I apologize, I can't give you a concrete answer, but as we progress in this process, hopefully we have a better idea of what implementation may look like. So thank you for that question. All right, if there are no additional questions, I'll go ahead and wrap up this meeting. Thank you again for all of your participation and questions. And don't forget to check out those video modules because they will be helpful. Have a great day, everyone.